You can hear me? Cool. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, it's really great to be here with y'all tonight. Big fan of all your quarantine snacks. I am Kelsey Crane. I'm with the Sierra Club Virginia chapter, joining you tonight from Richmond, Virginia, which is the occupied land of the Monacan, Powhatan, Maapni, and Pamunkey tribes, among others. As a climate activist and someone who works in climate policy, I actually really love getting to talk about clean transportation. We've been working on clean energy for a long time, but transportation needs a lot of attention. It's easy to get lost in the data and some of the big reports, but transportation is a human issue. It's a health issue. It's a quality of life issue. Which is something that drives me to do this work, knowing how much a better, cleaner transportation system is needed and how much it's within reach and how much it could improve communities and people's lives. And people engaging in democracy is going to be a big way to make that change. So clean transportation, next slide, is going to be a big focus of the General Assembly session that we're coming into soon. Like I said, transportation is a big piece of our economy, our quality of life. Pre-COVID, still every day, we kind of plan our daily lives around where we need to get to, where we need to be, how we're going to get there. But in our current transportation system, too many people are facing unreliable transit service, disconnected or unsafe bike lanes, long commutes, limited options to get around without a car. So by moving to a cleaner transportation system, we can address a lot of different issues, but particularly related to our health, environmental justice, and the climate crisis. Next slide. So with health, transportation is actually, we have some amazing medical professionals that are with us tonight. So I'm going to leave a lot of this to those experts, but it's causing about half of our air pollution in the US and Virginia, and cars are the primary source, around 80% of that air pollution. And that pollution is impairing our health in different communities. We're seeing lung disease, childhood asthma, which we know we have high rates of in Virginia and we need to address, heart disease, headaches and cognitive issues, irritation to people's noses and throats, and nervous system damage, and a lot of other effects are caused by different air pollutants that are coming from our current transportation system. You can go to the next slide. And even more so, the exposure to that air pollution is substantially higher for communities of color, and clean transportation can address those environmental justices and environmental racism that we're seeing from our transportation system as it is. There was a great study last year from the Union of Concerned Scientists, really not great, but the results of it showed that Asian Americans, African Americans, Latinx residents in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic on average are exposed to 66% more air pollution from cars, trucks, and buses. That is because disproportionately those communities live closer to highways and transit stations. And for many years, people have known and experienced firsthand the impacts of that increased air pollution, translates to higher rates of lung and heart disease, asthma, diabetes, developmental issues, and premature deaths. And the air pollution that we're seeing from that transportation now, we've seen in some other studies, can be attributed to more premature deaths every year than car accidents. So if we're looking at, addressing safety and health issues in our transportation system, those tailpipe emissions and what's fueling our current transportation system, we really need to address. Next slide. But especially because of climate issues. Clean transportation is a climate solution. After 4 years of climate policy, amongst many other things, moving in the wrong direction in DC, we need to be doing more to fight climate change. Building on the progress that we achieved in the 2020 session, clean transportation is the next top priority for climate action. It is our top contributor to climate change in Virginia, about half of our carbon emissions, and also across the US, it's now the #1 source of global warming, pollution. We've done some good work in the clean energy sector, and now we need to make some bold commitments in clean transportation. We're seeing commitments from multiple states and countries to ban the sale of internal combustion engines by 2035. And when California made that commitment, Governor Gavin Newsom said something that made a lot of sense. He said, "This is the most impactful step we can take to fight climate change. For too many decades, we've allowed cars to pollute the air that our children and our families breathe. We shouldn't have to worry if our cars are giving our kids asthma. Our cars shouldn't make wildfires worse and create more days filled with smoky air. Cars shouldn't melt glaciers or raise sea levels, threatening our cherished beaches and coastlines." I think that's something that we really, feel in Virginia with a lot of coastal communities that are at such threat of climate change. But we are in a position now. We have the technology to move beyond these fuels and to be putting cars to, we are already making cars that don't harm our health. So next slide. And then this is everything around taking climate action is just critical to be protecting our basic rights to clean air, clean water, and a livable planet. We are, like I said, we're behind right now where we could be in the US, and we can take some huge leaps ahead with some really key policies here in Virginia. Our fuel economy standards, we saw flatlined under the Trump administration, and we're trying to get caught up to where some fuel economy standards that other countries achieved years ago. So these progress is definitely achievable and is already happening in this area. Go ahead and click. But the current system that we have right now, we need to look at moving beyond without making some significant changes that are achievable. Our communities are, the way that we build our communities, the way that transportation systems are planned and funded, we are not going to achieve our climate goals. But we can if we move forward with some great, with some of the opportunities that we have ahead of us. So go ahead and next slide. And I did want to mention, I've been talking a lot about clean cars, but when it comes to our transportation system, it goes a lot, there's a lot we can do beyond clean cars. There's actually, we should be thinking locally how we develop communities where it's able to, people are able to bike, walk, carpool, access good transit systems. A lot of those transportation alternatives, we can definitely steer our future development towards those and improve communities in a lot of great ways. And then the cars that we have left on the road, we can progressively make cleaner and eventually move towards electric vehicles, system-wide. Next slide. So what do we have opportunities for in 2021? There are some really exciting policies that we know are working. These policies for advanced clean car standards, modernizing our transit system, adopting a state EV rebate, and looking at fleet electrification, including our school buses in Virginia, are strong policy solutions we can move forward and will bring benefits to all Virginians, and any state legislator in Virginia who cares about health, environmental justice, or climate action should be supporting these policies. So just to touch on each of these briefly, you can go to the next slide. The advanced clean car standards are a combined package of policies that address greenhouse gas emissions, smog, and other air pollutants that are coming from our current car tailpipes. With it's really effective package of regulations. It sets some goals for electric vehicles and would put Virginia on the pathway to achieve a full transition to 100% clean cars by 2035. And there's a lot of other policies that we can build on top of the advanced clean car standards to keep moving forward. So next slide. And then with that, we need to make EVs more affordable. We have the opportunity this year coming out of a DMME study to actually implement an EV rebate program in Virginia that on top of the federal tax credit would make EVs more affordable at the, from the ticket price for consumers who are looking to purchase electric vehicles in Virginia. So the advanced clean car standards help create that market for EVs, help bring those to dealers and help foster the adoption of them here in Virginia, and the state incentives will help make it more affordable for more people. Next slide. And then the transit modernization study is a really exciting opportunity. We need to make improvements to transit systems here in Virginia. So this actually directs DRPT to do a needs assessment of our current transit system and improve improve it for riders in the Commonwealth with better shelters, GPS technology, better payment systems, dedicated bus lanes, workforce protections, and then also rider representation on governing boards that make decisions about transit funding and other transit issues, so that the people who are most impacted have a voice at the table. So next slide. As a package, these set of bills can position Virginia to take leaps ahead on clean, equitable transportation, and we can achieve the full phase out of fossil fuels that we need to protect our right to clean air, clean water, and a stable planet. To get those bills passed, we need to make sure our legislators are hearing from constituents like you, which is why I'm happy to see so many people here who are great climate activists, tonight prepare to dive into this legislative session and use your power as a constituent to demand the bold climate action we need to continue into 2021. So since those health impacts are, those health benefits of this legislation are such an important component, I am really glad that we have some guests tonight with Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action. So I'm glad to turn it over next to Dr. Homan-Wei and Lillian Singer. Dr. Homan-Wei is an internal medicine physician at Inova Fairfax Hospital in Northern Virginia and is a founding member of Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action, which is a group of clinicians that advocates for the health of Virginians via climate solutions. He is also a health and climate ambassador with Eco America and Physicians for Social Responsibilities. And Lillian Singer is a fourth-year medical student at Virginia Commonwealth University with an interest in climate health curriculum and advocacy. She's also a member of Virginia Clinicians for Climate Action, a co-founder of VCU's Medical Students for Sustainable Future chapter. So I'm going to turn it over to y'all to talk more about those really important health impacts and benefits that we could see from clean transportation.
Thank you, Kelsey. Speaking from the hospital, so I apologize if there are any announcements ahead from time to time. So thank you for having me. Tim, you can go to the next slide, please. So we want to start out by talking about legislations, and bipartisan legislations on the federal level has, such as the Air Pollution Control Act in the 1950s and the Clean Air Act in the 1970s, were enacted to recognize that air pollution endangers public health and welfare, and that action needs to be taken to limit emissions from both industrial and mobile sources. I think fast forward to 2021, the science has only provided us more insight as to the effect of climate change and pollution on health. The idea that polluted air, water, and soil leads to poor health remains the truth. I think recently, besides the attention placed appropriately on polluting energy, production practices such as coal-fired plants, transportation sector has really come into focus as a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please.
So when we look at CO2 emissions overall, nationally, vehicular emissions account for 28% of total CO2 production. But that figure is at a staggering 45% in Virginia due to the sheer number of solo commuters that we have. It's not news to anybody that traffic in Virginia is pretty much unparalleled across the country, and it shows in our emissions. And as it says here, our decarbonization policies are not only to lower greenhouse gas emissions, which contribute to climate change, but we're also looking to reduce the fine particulate matter, which you'll hear as PM 2.5. And that's what comes out of our cars' tailpipes. And as Kelsey touched on, the effects on our various body systems can't be understated. It's, air pollution is linked to premature mortality, but also just morbidity throughout the lifespan, cardiovascular, respiratory, but also autoimmune, neurologic, you name it. Next slide, please. So the American commute, these numbers are a little bit hard to gauge in present day, given that we're all virtual. So these figures are more recent for kind of 2019, 2020, but one way Americans are commuting about half an hour. So that's about 30 minutes one way, an hour total a day. And from 2010 to 2018, we saw a jump from 3.3 million to 4.3 million solo commuters with a 90+ minute commute one way. And that's not insubstantial. I think we like to think that it's mostly cars on the road and not so much kind of long distance truckers and things like that. But 4.3 million is a pretty substantial fraction of the vehicle force on the road. You can go to the next slide. All right, so you might recognize this slide. This is also something that Kelsey touched on. The science behind emissions here. The big picture when we think about the impact of transportation emissions on health is that it is impacting every single body system, like I mentioned. And we tend to think about the lungs, asthma, and COPD, but the components of smog, like nitrous oxide and carbon monoxide, have varying and compounding effects on every part of the body. And the more research we're doing, the more we're seeing how air pollution is linked to exacerbation of underlying autoimmune conditions, heart disease, stroke, chronic headaches, and things that we haven't even realized yet. You can go to the next slide. Oh, you're muted, Dr. Y.
Thank you. Just found that. So Virginia Conditions for Climate Action recently commissioned a transportation report studying the effects of transportation sector on the health of Virginians. And we know that increased CO2, as Lillian had mentioned, results in increase of warmer temperatures, and that's got downstream effects, as you guys know, that it lengthens the allergy seasons, increases exacerbation of lung disease such as asthma and COPD, cardiac disease, and heat strokes. But these fine particulate matters, the PM 2.5, it really creates an impact as well. Next slide, please. And our report concludes that the PM 2.5 in Virginia can lead to health impacts, estimated to be about 3,000 premature deaths, 230,000 child asthma attacks, 110 strokes, and 360,000 lost work days annually across the state. Next slide, please. And when you see the patients that have their lives turned upside down due to the effect of climate change, you really realize that as a physician that you have the responsibility to address the underlying factors that contribute to these poor health outcomes. I remember a woman in her 40s that was staying in the hospital for weeks because her asthma exacerbation by poor air quality and extreme heat, and she was just not getting better and worry about being able to maintain a sustainable income to pay her bills. And recently I saw a man who was in his 60s who worked for the park services who passed out in a really hot day due to heat stroke, despite trying to hydrate himself as best as he can. And he was admitted because as he fell, he actually sustained a hip fracture. So when you think about the public health burden that climate change places on the Virginians, from infant premature mortalities to ER visits to hospital stays, the health and economic consequences can be staggering. Next, please. From the standpoint of environmental justice, which our next speakers will talk about it a little bit more, our study also found that the effects disproportionately affect those that are most socially vulnerable, the definition stated here, as they experience 61% higher death rates in Virginia due to air pollution. Next, please. And keeping Virginians healthy goes beyond what I can do as a physician at the bedside, and it involves sound policy driven by science and research, and advancing clean car standards is a vital step in the Commonwealth. Next, please.
So to provide some perspective from kind of the student doctor perspective, it's my job as a student, to kind of marry the wisdom of the physicians who came before me, all of them who are teaching me, with with the ever-evolving data and evidence that our research yields. So I glean insight from patients that I work with today while thinking ahead to the patients that I'm going to be helping, 20 years from now. And with this eye to the future, the current state of affairs is alarming and it's bleak. We lack the rigorous clean air and car standards that we need today, if not 10 years ago, to ensure even maintenance of the status quo for our children's health. So that's why at my school, as well as with my counterparts at the University of Virginia, we've worked on founding our respective chapters of Medical Students for a Sustainable Future to educate ourselves and empower ourselves as clinicians, but also to look out for the patients we haven't even met yet. You can go ahead to the next slide. So Virginia is emerging as a leader in clean energy with the recently passed Virginia Clean Economy Act, which allowed the Commonwealth to join the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and allows us to achieve 100% renewable energy generation in the state by 2050, at least ideally if things continue on this path. And you can go ahead to our last slide. So if you would like to learn more about the transportation report that VCCA put out this year, we've provided the links and the QR codes here, and Tim will make these available to all at the session's conclusion. Please note that we also have 4 transportation and health in Virginia videos, which provide further perspectives on the subject matter. So thank you so much, and we will turn it back over to Tim.
Thank you, Lena and Homan. Really appreciate you taking the time. We did dedicate a little bit of time at this portion of the section of the conversation for questions. I don't actually see any in the chat box as of right now or in our Facebook Live feed, and I think that's because you did such a wonderful job of providing such contextual information. Oh, never mind, one just came in. How do more remote work legislation support reduction of airborne particulates? That's an interesting question, and maybe there's other folks who are also speakers that could answer that if Lillian and Homan did not necessarily want to, but or Connor for that matter.
I can answer it.
Great.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that we can and should be looking at for cutting greenhouse gases from transportation, which also address the tailpipe emissions. There's some great studies on kind of the cost benefit of some of those, and encouraging people to work from home actually came out really close to the top in having doesn't cost a lot, and it reduces it has the potential to reduce a lot of greenhouse gases. It's pretty at the time that report was done, it was pretty far from reality that everyone was going to be working from home, but these are different circumstances. So I think now as big companies are looking at sustainability, work from home or the options for staggered workforces do play into that. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at other policy solutions that drive us towards cleaner fuels and do properly fund transit systems for the people who need to use them.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that overview. And we're going to go ahead and turn on to the next section of it, which is more of a dive into legislation that we'll be seeing in this legislative session. And to do so, I'm going to introduce Lena, who is the Energy and Climate Policy Manager for the Nature Conservancy's Virginia chapter. Lena Lewis is, again, somebody who's contributing their time today, and we're really thankful of it and excited to hear what they have to say.
Thanks. So I want to focus on one piece of legislation that we could really use your support lobbying for to your representatives, and that's the Advanced Clean Cars Program bill, or as we usually just refer to it, the Clean Cars bill. Next slide. You've heard that in Virginia, transportation is the largest source of carbon dioxide emissions in the state. And Lillian said 45%, I'm rounding it up to half. So within the transportation sector, when you look at what kinds of vehicles are the biggest polluters, collectively, it is our light-duty personal vehicles that are the largest source of that carbon dioxide pollution from transportation. It's our cars, our SUVs, our light-duty trucks. They make up 37% of the state's carbon dioxide emissions, which together is larger than the carbon dioxide emissions from all of our power plants. And we are now on a trajectory to become carbon and fossil fuel free from the power sector. We really need a similar plan for our transportation sector. And that is going to take many pieces of the puzzle to all work together to transition such a complex sector. Oh my gosh, my battery is low. Hang on. Okay, phew, not disconnected.
Lena, I think there's a bit of a audio issue with your microphone. I don't know if that happened when it maybe almost got disconnected. Let's see. Can't have a virtual meeting without some technological issues, folks. So we'll go ahead and notice that some questions have come in. So while Lena's getting reconnected, I will go ahead and ask another question. And other folks can feel free to jump in. It says one question is 2 years ago, Virginia implemented a punitive fee schedule for EVs and low consumption ICE vehicles to raise money for building more roads. How do we get more holistic philosophy in transportation? Kelsey, did you have thoughts on that one?
Might pull in some of our state EV policy experts. I see Blair is with Gen 180, might be able to answer this question if you are able to let her unmute.
Yeah, I can do that. 1 second. Just need to find them in the, oh. One moment, please. Thank you for your patience. Just need to find Blair.
Yeah, and that's related to another question about some of the other fees on EVs.
There. Blair, I just asked you to unmute. You should be able to do that now, hopefully.
There it worked. Awesome. Yeah, poor Lena, that blows. And it happens. So hopefully she can join us again. So the first question was, should vehicle property taxes go towards funding locality transportation budgets? That would be a very intriguing concept for sure. Generally, property taxes on vehicles, how they're funded, are determined by local municipalities. So for instance, Fairfax counties, I know, is particularly high, where I live in Charlottesville, it's actually a little bit lower. So definitely an interesting concept, and very curious to see what local representatives would say about it. I do know property taxes for homes and sometimes cars, depending on jurisdiction, fund schools, however. So removing any funding from your local schools could potentially have an optics backfire, but you never know. What was, Tim, the other question that popped in? I'm sorry. Oh, is it Jeffries?
Yes.
I can't hear Tim because he's muted. Oh, Lena's back.
Lena is back. Lena.
Yay, go Lena.
Yeah, let me make you a co-host so you all have full permissions. Should be able to unmute yourself. Thank you again, Blair, for jumping in there.
Thank you,
really
Blair.
quickly.
So sorry about
Hey,
that.
I did not do your presentation. I could, but I didn't.
I'm sure
I
you
just answered
could.
questions.
Okay, so sorry for that excitement. Okay, shall I just continue where I left off?
Yeah, so we just moved to this
Okay.
slide. Mhm.
Okay, great. Okay, so we have this complex transportation system. It's going to take a lot of different pieces to decarbonize it, but one piece is looking at what kind of vehicles we're driving. And when you look at like how can we drastically reduce the carbon emissions from the vehicles on the road, the answer really is to convert to electric vehicles, because they are emitting only about 1/3 of the carbon emissions. So if you can go to the next slide. Okay, so I hope you really like these sophisticated graphics here. In Virginia, the average passenger car emits 4.6 metric tons of carbon dioxide a year. And to put that in perspective, per person, typical carbon footprint per person across our whole lifestyle is about 10 metric tons of carbon. So when you convert to an electric vehicle, of course, that vehicle isn't emitting any carbon dioxide of its own. It's happening at the power plant, but it's only 1.5 metric tons per year. And that's getting lower every year now, thanks to joining RGGI and thanks to the Virginia Clean Economy Act. So this 67% reduction in carbon emissions, that's transformational. That's the kind of serious climate action we need. The problem is that even though we have a lot of people in Virginia who would like to buy electric vehicles, and there are electric models, lots of electric models available today, they're not necessarily available in Virginia for Virginians to purchase. So we have this mismatch between the supply available in Virginia and the demand that's already there for purchasing electric vehicles. The reason that we don't have those cars in Virginia is because they're being sent to other states. Next slide. Okay, the states in blue here, dark blue, have adopted standards called Zero Emission Vehicle Standards, or ZEV for short. And the way these work is that these states require that a certain small percent of vehicles sold by each manufacturer in the state must be a zero emission vehicle. So next. And that percent increases little by little over time. So for example, in 2025, it would require manufacturers to have 8% of their vehicle sales in Virginia to be electric. Next. So the key thing here is that customers still have choice of conventional gas-powered vehicles, but in addition, next, they also increase consumer choice and accessibility to electric vehicles because, and the final click on this page, what happens is manufacturers who are making decisions at the national level are deciding which dealerships to send which models to. And some manufacturers have electric vehicle models that they are sending only to the ZEV states or prioritizing sending to the ZEV states. And the states that aren't in dark blue are last in line to get those vehicles. So there are electric vehicles that are available in Maryland, but they're not available here in Virginia. So what we want to do with the Clean Cars Bill is to adopt these ZEV standards so that we also can have access to those cars. Next slide. So the Clean Cars legislation, it's sponsored by Delegate Bagby and its chief co-sponsor is Delegate Sullivan. It has two components to it. One is the one I was just talking about, the ZEV, or Zero Emission Vehicles component. And that will give customers choice and access to electric vehicles in Virginia and increase the diversity of electric vehicle models for sale, including, I think a lot of people think of electric vehicles as being really expensive. They are becoming more affordable all the time, and there's a lot of models already available in other states, at least, that are much more affordable than you would expect, and within a few years are going to be at price parity with gas-powered vehicles. In addition, this legislation sends a message to manufacturers, look, you're trying to decide what's the safe bet on what to invest in for the future for your company. You could continue to invest in making polluting gas-powered vehicles, or you could invest in electric vehicles. And it's really time to go all in on electric. That's the safe, sensible bet. Now, I mentioned that most of the cars that are would be sold, even in ZEV states, are still going to be gas-powered cars. Only 8% in 2025 would be electric. So the second part of this legislation, if you can click, it deals with all of those cars that are still gas-powered cars, low emission vehicle standards or LEV standards. These pertain to gas-powered vehicles, and it will require that on average, they will have lower emissions than under federal standards. So this gives us climate benefits. It gives us immediate health benefits, as you just heard from our medical experts. And it will also save consumers money because they're buying less gasoline. And I'll just make a little note here. I know Kelsey talked about how this legislation could potentially get us on track to have zero sales of gas-powered vehicles by 2035. That's possible, but I would not emphasize that possibility to your legislators because they're really nervous that they're going to force dealerships to sell cars that no one wants to buy as it is. So I wouldn't stress that point, but I will also say there is consumer interest in buying these electric vehicles now. There's a couple of reports, one by Generation 180 with Blair that you just heard from, found that over half of survey respondents would consider buying an electric vehicle for the next car. But there's got to be electric vehicles in the dealership lots for people to try out if they're going to buy them. Next slide. Okay, so why is this such a critical piece of legislation to pass this year? Because time is of the essence with climate change, and you all know that. And as it is, this legislation it wouldn't go into effect until 2 years after the regulation is finalized, and that's based on requirements of the Clean Air Act. So there's already this built-in lag time to get manufacturers time to adjust. In addition, it's not like everybody's going to go out and buy a new car the first year this legislation goes into effect. So it's going to take a while for the fleet on the road to turn over. And finally, we are in a difficult budget situation. This legislation doesn't require raising taxes. So that's why all of this makes sense for this year. Next slide. So we need your help. So glad you were on this call today. We need for you to ask your representatives to lead on supporting this bill, please, and ask Governor Northam to support this bill as well. And please recruit your friends. And I have a link here. Share your story of trying to buy an electric vehicle here if Tim shares these slides afterwards. This is a survey that Generation 180 created. And I just want to emphasize that your personal stories of any difficulties you've had finding electric vehicles, those are very powerful to tell to your representatives. You might say, oh, I'm just one person, but stories are very compelling to say, like, look, I really wanted to buy this model. I couldn't get it at my dealership. I had to go to Maryland. I had to order it from Tesla. I ended up buying a gas-powered car, whatever it is. I really encourage you to share those stories because they really, really can make a difference. So I'll stop here and see if we have any questions.
Great, and I'm glad we have a lot of resident experts in addition to the people we planned on having on this call. So I have tracked them. I want to go back to the original one I tried to ask, and it was 2 years ago, Virginia implemented a punitive fee schedule for electric vehicles and low consumption ICE vehicles to raise money for building more roads. And how do we get a more holistic philosophy in transportation?
Can I adjust that to start?
Of course.
Okay, well, let me just say that for right now, the fact that that punitive legislation passed might work to our advantage in terms of passing the clean car standards this year and other policies that support EVs, because legislators will ask, well, what about the fact that EV drivers aren't paying their fair share of taxes through gas taxes to support maintenance and construction of roads? And here we have a built-in answer to say, but you know what? They are paying their fair share through this legislation that was passed, that's calculated to estimate how much they are missing out from EV owners. So that's the short-term answer. In long-term, I think we should be moving to taxes based on vehicle miles traveled and the weight of the vehicle, rather than on gasoline, because it's no longer the case that the amount of gasoline you buy is a good proxy for how much impact you have on the roads. So I think we will see ourselves shifting to that in the years to come.
Thank you.
And I hear you, Jeffrey. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I think this is also an interesting question, is should vehicle property tax go toward funding locality transportation budgets? And again, I feel like anyone on this panel could answer that. Lena, do you have any thoughts on that, or Kelsey?
That's a good question. I don't know enough about that, frankly, to have any coherent thoughts on that.
Yeah, Blair gave a quick answer to that question, and I think there would be a lot of just need to look at locality by locality, you know, what other programs are being funded, and where it makes sense, and where people might be able to shift funding. But as I do know that in terms of the gas tax funds that we need for, you know, funding public transit also, because it goes to not only road projects, but to funding public transit, that there is a way with the omnibus transportation package bill that was passed last year that accounts for that, as you know, EVs are sold, that make up for that loss in the gas tax. So that's not, if that is a concern that folks ever hear from your legislators, that is something that it's not a concern in Virginia. We've already, you can tell legislators, they already fixed that themselves last year.
Yeah, I apologize for the redundancy. Blair, did you want to add anything else to that? Okay, I'm good. Thank you, Blair. Well, great question. Worth asking twice. So let us see. Is the Clean Car Standards legislation, I assume the one which is being introduced in Virginia, basically California standards related to Section 177 of the Clean Air Act? And the second part of that question is the text of this Virginia bill available? I will say the answer to that, the second answer to that is not yet. We're hoping it will be available on LIS prior to session, but we'll get a little bit more into the second part of that question in the next section of this conversation. So I don't know who wants to answer the first part. Essentially, is this bill the California standards
Yes.
bill?
Yes, this is, and the reason for that is because when the Clean Air Act was adopted, California was already ahead of federal standards. California had already had standards in place to deal with their high levels of air pollution. And so an exception was built into the Clean Air Act that basically said California can have more rigorous, more stringent air quality or emission standards for vehicles than the federal government. And other states can choose to adopt California's standards, but other states cannot create their own standards. So states have a choice of default as federal standards or choose the California standards. And so the map that I showed you, all of those states then have the exact same standards, which is a strength because manufacturers don't have to deal with 18 different standards according to which state they're selling cars in. I would also say when you're talking to your legislators, unless they are very progressive, I would not refer to this as the California standards because for some reason, some legislators don't want to be like California. So, you know, you can emphasize that, look, we can be like Washington State, Maryland, Colorado. You know, I think those are better states to emphasize.
Another question, does the Clean Car Act mandate a phased approach to electric vehicles as a fraction of car sales?
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure what you mean by phased approach, but that is the idea that year by year, the percent of cars sold that have to be either electric or hybrid electric increases. And the math of that is actually a little bit more complicated because different cars can earn different number of credits based on how far they can go on one electric charge. And so that's why we say like it'll be about 8% by 2025. I don't know if that answers your question enough, but feel free to expand on that if I didn't cover it.
Okay. Going to move on for the sake of time. We'll recycle back to any questions we haven't gotten to, although I think I got to a lot of them that either will be answered in the next section or we can circle back afterwards. So for now, we're going to talk about exactly what we can do in terms of legislative advocacy on the grassroots level that can lead to the passage and implementation of the Clean Car Standards legislation. This is kind of an overview of the brief education of the General Assembly and how it operates for any folks who have never gotten engaged on state level advocacy before. Or it can be, and also just like some general practical tips about tracking legislation, lobbying your legislators, although lobbying looks very different right now, engaging committees, of course, contacting representatives, and signing up for legislative advocacy updates that the Sierra Club Virginia chapter will be putting on. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce two other people on this call who will be part of this discussion. Like I said, we have some resident experts. Two people I'll highlight, of course, are Connor Kish, who is our legislative and political director at the Sierra Club Virginia chapter, and Bob Shippey is also on this call at the ready to answer questions and add on to the conversation, who is our legislative committee chair. So both of them have been scrambling and working very diligently to keep up with everything that the General Assembly is going to be doing, as well as doing their best to ensure the best case scenario of getting these legislation passed as swiftly and as effectively as possible. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Connor right now.
Thanks so much, Tim, and good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for taking some time to be with us and learn about this legislation. Our medical experts and Lena, with an assist from Blair, have really done a great job of explaining why this legislation is so critical for Virginia and for the people of Virginia. That necessary and well-flowing shift of our discussion is, since that is so important, how do we get it done? And what does that process look like? And how do we ensure that the legislation passes? So for some of you who have been deeply involved in the legislative process in Virginia for some time, we'll be having a refresher. Others will learn for the first time. And in fact, everyone will learn something for the first time, likely, as we've never faced a session like this before in Virginia. And frankly, many legislatures across the country have never faced the situation that many of them do at this moment due to COVID. In Virginia, the legislative session is in January and February. It is a time for lawmakers to introduce bills to change the laws in Virginia. Every January, Virginia has what is known as a regular session, which means that it occurs every year regularly. And that also means that the special session occurs at special times when the legislature needs to act on issues. You'll know that you'll notice last summer the legislature was in a special session to respond to the budget and ongoing fiscal crisis in Virginia due to COVID. So the regular session is going to start on Wednesday, January 13th this year, so next Wednesday. It typically in even years would last for 60 days. However, in odd years, it typically lasts for 45 days. There's currently a bit of a disagreement among the political parties about how long the session will last this year. What I could best suggest to you is that it will be 30 days instead of 45 days, which really compresses the timeline for legislators to get their work done. And by doing that, really increases the importance of them hearing from their constituents and from the people of Virginia about what's important. There's a couple important moments to note. 10 a.m. on January 13th is a very important moment. That is the deadline by which legislators must introduce their legislation. So by that time, we will know what bills will be considered for the session. You'll also note that we have a House and a Senate, so bicameral legislature, and bills need to pass both chambers. So how do they do that? Well, that's through a process called crossover, which is when the bills passed in one chamber move to the other to be considered. And then there's also a special day reserved for the introduction of the budget. Thank you, Tim. Yes, so 2 chambers. The House, obviously 100 members, currently sits at 55, and the Senate, 55 Democrats and 45 Republicans, and the Senate at 21 Democrats and 19 Republicans. All General Assembly members can write, introduce bills, vote on legislation, and serve on committees, and most all of them do. One of the things that I will just touch on briefly for the purpose of those who are deeply engaged in the legislative process in Virginia, there is a possibility that the governor can call a special session of the General Assembly should the General Assembly not complete its work in 30 days. So while we do expect that the Assembly will convene on the 13th of January and end on the 13th of February, that could be extended in a large procedural motion that is not worth debating and discussing at this time. So I'll go ahead and send it to the next slide, which I believe is Tim, if I'm not mistaken. Oh no, still me.
For the sake of time, I skipped those last 2 slides since I want to make sure that we have more time for questions.
Okay, then you can go ahead and put the rest of the slide up. So I want to discuss just briefly, how did we get to the Clean Cars bill, and how does a legislator get to any bill really that you hear or want to advocate for during the session? So the bills can come from a variety of places, their constituents, advocacy groups, and lobbyists. The bills are drafted and introduced. Once they're introduced, they're sent to the committee. In the House, they're sent to committee by the Speaker. In the Senate, they're sent to committee by the clerk. The committees hold public testimony. These are what you typically see. Legislators sitting at a dais and listening to folks testify support or opposition to bills. Once the bill is voted, each member gets 1 vote in the House and the Senate. And once it gets through the General Assembly itself, it goes over to the governor. Where the process is not yet quite done, the governor can veto a bill or sign a bill or make an amendment to a bill, in which case the General Assembly gets back involved. So really a very complicated process in terms of how long it can take for this whole thing to work itself out. Next slide, please.
Connor, we had a quick question.
Sure.
But there was when are committee assignments made?
Committee assignments are live on LIS, which is the Legislative Information Systems website. And Tim or Kelsey could type lis.virginia.gov into the chat box. But those committee assignments are listed there under a section called Standing Committees, and you'll be able to see which committee your legislator sits on. They change at the start of every new General Assembly electoral period. So after an election and when a new General Assembly is seated, they are on those committees for 2 years. Thank you, Kelsey. Oh, and Blair is clarifying that the question may have been related to when the bill is assigned to a committee. That's a great question that does not really have an answer. It can be assigned to a committee at the whim of the Speaker or the Senate clerk. The process for doing that can take quite a while or could be very quick. Tim, are there any other questions? I don't think so. Unless we'll take them at the end. Okay. So here is where we need your help. We need your help contacting your legislator and advocating for these bills, including the Clean Cars bill. And one of the things that is most important and most effective is when a legislator hears from someone that lives in their district about an issue that's important to them. When you can make that connection with your legislator and share why you think a bill is important, I guarantee you 99% of the time the legislator will listen to you, will ask questions, and will certainly keep in touch with you. For those that are really new to the advocacy process in Virginia, it's important that you not think about the Virginia General Assembly like you would think about Congress. There are many opportunities to have direct and easy and really sometimes often personal conversations with the legislator themselves. And that is really important to note because it's those connections that really make the difference for when legislators are looking to vote up or down on a bill. They want to hear from the people they represent. They want to hear from the people that vote for them. So that is an absolutely critical component. One of the other critical components is testifying, and that is speaking at a committee meeting in support of legislation. One of the things that people always tell me is that it seems really scary and they're not sure they want to do it. And I think that one of the best ways I've used to dispel that notion is you are not sitting in front of the United States Senate with your hand up testifying under oath to be anything. These are very often informal settings where you're asked to speak very briefly in front of a committee and share your thoughts. It is not scary. You don't need a speech. You don't even need to bring a lawyer. You just get up there and share your thoughts. And it can really, I'm being very honest with you, make the difference for legislation. When the lawmakers are in their chairs listening, you have their full attention. Next slide, please. One other thing I want to mention is sort of how do you keep track of this process? I mean, how do I know when the bill's in subcommittee? How do I know when it's in full committee? How do I know when it's on the floor? That website, lis.virginia.gov, lists step-by-step the results of each action taken by the General Assembly on a bill. So you will see the subcommittee vote. If it passes, you will see the committee vote. If it passes, you will see the floor vote. And in between those, you'll be able to see when the committee is meeting to hear that bill. If a bill makes it to the governor, same process as your legislator. You want to make sure that the governor hears from you and his office is aware of the swell of support behind a piece of legislation. Next slide.
Hey, Connor, I just want to mention one other thing. Especially if this is your first go round with advocacy and you try to contact your representative, if you end up with their assistant or their legislative aide, that's not a bad thing. In fact, with many lawmakers, it can almost be more beneficial to develop some kind of communication relationship with their assistant. They do most of the work. You're probably not surprised to hear that. They always update the lawmaker at the end of each day in terms of those conversations. So you're not just getting diverted and not heard. So please don't take that as any kind of negative. In fact, again, it can be a real positive. So I just encourage you to reach out, call the number, and whatever member of that staff you get a hold of is the person that you should be advocating with. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. That's a really, really important point to note that often in Virginia, the legislator only has one or two staff. So there is an intricate relationship between the staff and the member of the General Assembly because they just don't have the luxury of having a 30-person staff like a member of Congress would. And so those contacts that you can make with legislative staff is important. And so it can often really influence the lawmaker because when there's only one person working on your staff, you tend to trust that person and the information that they're bringing forward as a legislator. And yeah, I'm seeing a couple things I just want to flag in the chat, Tim, the phone line situation. I do want to flag that it's really going to be more important to email your legislator to request a time to speak versus calling them because as people are pointing out in the chat, typically legislators do have someone that answers their phone during the session, and that is just not going to be the case this year due to COVID. The Pocahontas building where the legislators' offices are held is limited to one person per staffer, or one staffer per member, excuse me. So there just isn't room to have an active phone line system. So those are really great points in the chat that emailing your legislator is in fact the way to go this year.
Thanks, Connor. And as Connor was mentioning, we just wanted to throw up a quick example of how to track legislation on the Legislative Information System, and also highlight that the Virginia Public Access Project, or vpap.org, also has a great search tool if you want to search for legislation by topic. Quickly looking, here's an example of what this looked like from last year, 2020 session. It's on the homepage, and you just click Bills and Resolutions, and you pick a particular bill. This was the first bill that was introduced in 2020. And if you look at it right now, I think almost all the bills will have this on there, committee referral pending. And you can keep checking back on that until it's updated. And hopefully, again, by using the same example from last year, you can see the history of where it's going to be. So this will be updated as soon as the staff working at LIS can do so. They have a lot of legislation to track. They try to do their best to get it up as soon as possible. And clicking on any of those where it says House referred to Committee and Privileges Elections, you can find out who voted on what action. Committee actions we'll talk about in just a couple minutes as well. So this is just a quick example of what it looks like. LIS doesn't look very user-friendly, but again, it's once you kind of know how to navigate it, it gives you all the information you typically would be looking for. So. Connor, I'll give it back to you.
Thanks, Tim. One of the most important parts of the legislative process is the committee process and understanding how they work. I used to be a legislative staffer, and in the time that I was there, only one time did a bill get to the floor of a chamber by not going through a committee process out of probably 10 to 15,000 bills that were introduced during the time that I worked there. So it's very important that the committee process be on your radar. They are the gatekeepers of the bill. They are the people who really take the time to look at the legislation very carefully. And they take that time in a subgroup from the main chamber. They don't intricately review the lines of each bill on the floor. That all is done in committee. They're designed by or designated by topic, and most subcommittees, most of the full committees have a subcommittee, and the subcommittees, I cannot stress enough, are often the most important part of the legislative process. If a subcommittee favorably recommends a bill, that sets it on a great track to be passed. Because the subcommittees are known among the legislators for having fully vetted the idea, for having fully gone through the bill and made sure that there's no unforced errors, things that may cause problems along the way. All of those things have been worked out. And the trust among the members is that it's been worked out at the subcommittee level. So passing a bill in subcommittee is absolutely critical to passing a bill in the full committee and on the floor of each chamber. In the House, subcommittee can be make or break. The House of Delegates can kill a bill in a subcommittee. If the bill you're supporting gets killed in a subcommittee, that is the end. It is not going on to the full committee. Whereas in the Senate, the bill will make it to a full committee no matter what, but with the recommendation of a subcommittee. And so just think in your head how often they'll overrule the recommendation, and it's just not very often. The bills, like I said, are the committees, like I said, are designated by topic, and thus the bills that are heard by each committee are also designated by topic. So one of the interesting things is that the title of the committee doesn't always, but often does relate to the topic of the bill. So we have here, which committee is the Clean Cars bill likely going to? If you had to guess, there's probably one that sticks out, and that is Transportation Committee, right? Well, if it has to deal with cars and has to deal with driving, then it must be going to the Transportation Committee. Maybe not. It's also possible that the bill could be heard in the General Laws Committee. The bill could be heard in the Agriculture Committee, Agriculture, Chesapeake, and Natural Resources Committee. Different components of different bills end up getting them sent to various committees, sometimes where you may not think they would have ended up. And so that is why the committees are so important. because once you find out where your bill is headed, if you know your bill's going to the Agriculture, Chesapeake and Natural Resources Committee, you now know which legislators you need to talk to. And you can, for a moment, put away the rest of the legislators and really focus your efforts on the ones at the committee. Next slide. This is very in the weeds, although every time I've given this presentation, people tell me that they they really like learning this part of it. So one of the things that you'll see during the committee is a bunch of words, a bunch of parliamentary words that people are saying, and what in the world is going on? Did my bill pass? Did my bill not pass? Where do I go now? So there's a couple committee actions to note. And so the word that you want to hear when you're advocating for a bill in a committee is report. The bill is reported to the next committee, reported to the floor. So when a legislator moves or makes a motion to report the bill, that is a time for celebration. That means they want to vote yes, they want to move the bill forward. Another motion that is often heard at the General Assembly is a motion to pass the bill by indefinitely. That is a very flowery language for bill is dead. They want to kill the bill. They do not want to hear it any further. Another one that comes up often is move to pass the bill by for the day. And that means that someone on the committee is not quite sure of something, and they are not sure that they want to kill the bill, but they are not sure that they want to pass it either. And they want to move the bill to the next meeting of that committee so that they can work out some details. A very bad word to hear if you're supporting a bill is the word strike. That means the legislator wants to delete the bill from the docket and no longer have the General Assembly consider it whatsoever during the session. A motion to refer will move a bill from one committee to another. In the House, they are known for laying the bill on the table. For years and years, we would constantly hear motions to lay the bill on the table, which is kind of actually exactly how it sounds. They put the bill down and stop looking at it. They've laid it on the table. Effectively, the bill is dead, but they were nice to you about it. And so that's the distinguish between pass by indefinitely and laid on the table. And one final word that you'll hear is incorporate. That means that two or more legislators have introduced a similar bill, and the General Assembly is annoyed by that, and they would like to only consider one bill, so they're going to combine them all into one bill. And move forward with that bill instead of dealing with several separate bills. So I'm seeing a couple of questions in the chat, the difference between strike, PBI, and table. Strike is made at the request of the legislator who introduced the bill. So for instance, if I'm bringing a bill forward and I no longer want that bill to be considered, I would strike it. If I'm on the committee and I want to kill the bill you're bringing forward, I would PBI or table. So I know that's very in the weeds, but sometimes it's really helpful to hear about the words that you're going to hear while you're listening to the bill, so you know what's going good and what's going bad when your bill is up during committee. Next slide. Lobbying. So this is your chance to get your bill passed. Here are some things on this slide that you should do and things that you should not do. You should explain why you care about the issue. You should share with them that you're a constituent. You should tell a personal story, bring them information to leave behind, and ask them, will you please support this bill? It's really important to make that ask. There are some things you should not do. Do not view the legislator as a celebrity. They are elected to represent you and they serve at your pleasure. So do not treat them as celebrities. Another important thing is don't debate the legislator. You know you're right and you think you're right and you think they're wrong. Even if you do get to that point, don't have a debate with the legislature that could stray from the point of by which you've scheduled the meeting. bring up your facts and your studies as needed, but don't only bring up facts and studies. You want to make sure you add in a personal connection. Next slide.
Bob, I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to add as one of our chief lobbyists for many years.
Connor's got it just right. You know, he's been on the other side of the table for a few years, and so he's absolutely right. And I'll just pile on about the personal stories. Those legislators will remember something specific that you mentioned about the impact to you or your family way more than any of the facts or data that you bring into that meeting.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, and Bob, please interrupt me if you want to add. Unfortunately, I can't see the little boxes, so I don't know when folks are trying to jump in. Next slide, please. So once your bill's in committee, there you are standing there, except this year you'll be sitting at home along with the legislators. There are some advantages to the committee process. There's less people to convince that you're right. There's only certain members of a committee. The media is present at committees. These are public. And so you never know what amplified voice the media will give to the work that you're supporting. And anyone can speak. Any person can sign up to speak to a General Assembly committee and share their thoughts. I mentioned earlier that you shouldn't be scared by testifying, and that is very true. It's really simple. You just say where you're from and why you're there. Speak briefly and thank the chair and the committee. It could be as short as 30 seconds. It could be as long as 2 minutes. It is not something to fret about. In fact, you should really think in your head about the incredible impact that it could make on the legislation that you're supporting. Next slide. I do want to mention lobby days in 2021, and I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey to talk more about it. Though typically, we ask folks to come to the Capitol in Richmond and meet with legislators and go around and attend the committee meetings and support the bills that our organization is championing. And it's just not going to be like that this year, but we are still going to bring forward opportunities for advocacy. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey to touch a little bit on that point.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, we are hoping you all will join us, and we'll bring several friends on January 28th. We are working with other environmental advocacy groups across the state to make this a big day for the clean transportation lobbying. But ahead of that day, for folks who want to be able to speak to lots of different environmental issues with their legislators, Virginia Conservation Network is hosting their annual Conservation Lobby Day, January 21st. So those are 2 dates to save in your calendar. I'm also aware of some other groups supporting different climate legislation who are pulling together lobby days. So keep an eye out for those on social media. We'll make sure to promote them and, you know, send out some emails as they are coming out. We have a Facebook page right now for our lobby day on the 28th. And I will share an RSVP link on that page as soon as possible. So if you want to go ahead and just RSVP on this page, I'm going to share in the chat, and we'll send out to everybody. Sierra Club will be sending out emails. CCAN will be sending out emails very soon. So you'll see a lot more info and more details on what that lobby day will look like, but we're hoping for hundreds of Virginians to come together virtually from all over the Commonwealth, and to, you know, be able to bring lots of people together because, you know, there isn't the, you know, restriction of geography to really show a large presence of support for this legislation and be able to speak to many legislators. The one for clean cars will be pretty close to or right after crossover that Connor mentioned. So we'll know at that point, and hopefully have seen, the House will have supported the bill, and we'll be able to build a lot of support in the Senate for this legislation. And it'll include the advanced clean car standards, the EV rebates, you know, we're including the transit modernization study, and there's some other really exciting bills that we'll highlight that day with some great guest speakers.
Yep, and I'll go ahead and mention up some of the other actions folks can take right now and future actions. So we are currently waiting to figure out the schedule of the official schedule of the General Assembly session and what that's going to look like. And once we have a better idea of that, we will have weekly legislative advocacy update forums. It'll be kind of mini versions of what this was today. We'll overview an issue, have partners speaking at them, and talk about where things are and what people can do right now in order to ensure that these vital bills get passed during this shorter and unprecedented General Assembly session. The other side of things, though, you don't have to wait to contact your legislators. Though we don't necessarily have the bills numbers just yet, we can still tell our legislators that we expect them to take action on X, Y, and Z issues, especially when it comes to transportation, when it comes to environmental justice. And we also have actions related to pipelines registration to protect people from some of the dangerous construction of fracked gas pipelines going through Virginia. We are posting links into the chat that you can sign up to essentially right now. Signing up to those, you can click an action that'll send a email that's pre-written and that you can add a personal note to immediately, automatically to your legislators. Also, taking action on that will also essentially opt you in to receive updates about that campaign. So anytime that we know something, we're going to go ahead and let everyone know what's going on and what actions they can take. We'll update them. We'll have new alerts that says, send this message to your legislator. It is the best way to be a grassroots-oriented rapid response team. And with the way that the session is going, and a bit of the unprecedented, all the elements of its unprecedented nature, we're really going to need that. That's going to help us get over the finish line with a lot of this vital and crucial legislation. So please sign up for those as you see them in the chat boxes. I think there's 2 others that I'll pop in just a minute. And on that note, we'll go ahead and take any other questions before we wrap up. There's also on our legislative side of things, contact information for folks. Like I said, I'm the communications manager. I don't do as much legislative advocacy, not nearly as much as Connor or Bob do, but wanted you to all be able to see the information there. I will also make these slides available on our website, as well as sent out to everyone who was an attendee today. And we will be looking forward to engaging with you all in the future. Thank you. Okay, so great. So we have a few questions coming in, which is perfect. And I don't know who wants to take these, but I did see that question. Thank you very much for bringing it up again. Someone had asked whether or not we had reached out to Transportation Secretary Valentine and what kind of steps we're taking to engage the administration on this. I know that there's a lot of activity going around on that. So Connor, I think you're probably the best person to answer a little bit about how we're engaging with the administration and on this issue.
Sure. We are continuing to have conversations with the administration almost daily on this legislation. We're in touch with the Department of Environmental Quality, the Department of Health, as well as the Secretary of Natural Resources Office, and continuing to have discussions with them in hopes that they will support the legislation. And once it gets to the governor, he will sign it. The Secretary of Transportation has also been involved in these conversations, and we have also launched a grassroots advocacy campaign to get folks to write Secretary Valentine and her office staff in support of the Clean Cars bill. And we continue to have that, that program live. So people continue to sign up and write her office. So we may be able to post the link in here for that advocacy page.
Great. The next question is it easier for the public to advocate online this year, given that times may be unknown very far in advance to plan on going to Richmond? Short answer is yes. Essentially, I don't know. I don't believe they will be having in-person lobbying or in-person committee testimonies. Connor, you can probably engage more about what we're hearing it's going to look like.
Yeah, that's exactly right. One of the things that COVID has done is in some ways made the General Assembly more accessible to people who couldn't reach it prior to it occurring only in Richmond at 7 o'clock in the morning on some days. And so at the Sierra Club, we're really aiming to use that, and we want to engage as many people as possible, and it really gives us the opportunity to do so. So I encourage you to spread the word, and not only engage yourself, but spread the word that the options to engage with the General Assembly are greatly expanded in some ways for folks that typically didn't have a way to get to Richmond during the session. So we're going to just make the best we can out of the situation by really using this as an opportunity to allow people to testify to the General Assembly and speak to their legislators in ways that they hadn't previously had the ability to do.
Yes, good question. And this was a question also that I want to make sure we got to, and it's really for any of the panel participants, any of the speakers, and it's what are our thoughts on electric rail in Virginia? Now I know most of the conversation's been centered on clean cars, but I don't know if anyone has any thoughts to offer on that right now.
I'll offer thumbs up on electric rail, right? As we said before, decarbonizing our transportation sector is going to take many different steps, and electrifying rail would be a great step to do. And it costs money, right? So I'd say a really promising answer to that is for Virginia to join the Transportation Climate Initiative. You know, you can ask Governor Northam, first of all, to sign the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, that 4 other states, I guess 3 states in DC have signed, because that Transportation and Climate Initiative is a way to generate funds for so many things we want to see happen in terms of electric rail, in terms of transit, in terms of electric school buses. They only can happen if we have the money for it. And the Transportation and Climate Initiative, or TCI, is the most promising way to do that.
Yeah, we have electric rail serving folks in Northern Virginia through WMATA, and you know, as we can support more transportation options in different communities, I think it's similar to any other, you know, transition or switch, just like solar energy. We've got to make sure that we're siting it equitably and effectively, and make sure that we're providing pathways that, you know, don't impact communities negatively for those rail systems. So yeah, as we can look at shifting to more and more non-road transportation options in Virginia, we, you know, provide better options and cleaner options to people.
Great. Well, that's all I see for now, and we're right at the end of when this was scheduled to adjourn. So just wanted again to highlight a huge thanks to all of you for participating. A huge thanks to Lena, Homan, and Lillian, and Kelsey, and Blair for jumping in randomly, and of course Connor and Bob. You all helped us have an engaging discussion. I hope we were able to provide enough context to underscore the urgency of this moment, the urgency of this legislation, and I do feel hopeful that we can get the things done. It seems like Virginia is poised more than it's ever been to adopt climate-friendly, climate justice legislation and really begin a new era of clean energy and equity and environmental justice. And of course, progress on those things start with events like this and from advocates like you tuning into these. So I speak for everyone who was a speaker today, that we thank you very much for being here. I will end on the note that these slides, this video, will all be available on the website and our social media. We'll also be plugging in additional resources and actions that you can take for them. So I hope everyone remains safe, healthy, and committed over the next few weeks. It's going to be a rough one, but the fight's definitely worth it, and the cause is definitely worth it. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you next time.